Dr. Sarah Chen's fingers trembled as she adjusted the quantum alignment scanner. Through the laboratory's panoramic windows, Shanghai's skyline gleamed in the morning sun, a view she'd admired countless times during late-night research sessions. But today, something was different. The sky had taken on an unusual purple tinge, and the air seemed to ripple with an electromagnetic charge that made her hair stand on end. The first ship appeared without warning, materializing through what her instruments registered as a controlled dimensional tear. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the sky darkened with vessels that defied physics as she understood it. Yet something about their propulsion signature seemed hauntingly familiar. She pulled up her grandfather's old research files, the ones she'd decoded after finding them hidden in a false bottom of his old desk. The waveform patterns matched perfectly. Her blood ran cold as she realized the implications. The aliens weren't using technology they'd developed independently. They'd somehow stolen or replicated research that her grandfather's team had abandoned decades ago. The global broadcast began moments later. The alien figure appeared on every screen, its iridescent scales shifting colors as it spoke in perfectly synthesized English. "People of Earth, I am High Commander Varex of the Mariax Confederation. Your planet now falls under our protection and governance. Surrender your military capabilities and submit to integration within the next planetary rotation, or face the consequences of defiance." Sarah's hands flew across her keyboard, comparing the dimensional signatures from her grandfather's files to the readings she was getting from the alien ships. The similarities were too precise to be coincidence. Her grandfather's team hadn't just theorized about dimensional manipulation. They'd achieved it, then buried the research, deeming it too dangerous. She initiated a secured quantum transmission to the facility she knew existed beneath the Antarctic ice. Her grandfather had mentioned it once, in his final days, delirious with fever. "Protocol Omega," he'd whispered. "If they ever come back, initiate Protocol Omega." The message was barely encoded when the first blast hit. The laboratory's windows shattered inward as a wave of energy, unlike anything in Earth's arsenal, swept through Shanghai's financial district. Buildings didn't explode or burn. They simply ceased to exist, their matter converted to pure energy in an instant. Sarah watched in horror as the wave approached her building. Her quantum scanner screamed with readings that matched the theoretical warnings in her grandfather's files. This wasn't just an attack, it was a demonstration of dimensional manipulation technology perfected for warfare. With trembling hands, she pressed the transmission key. Her final message broadcasted just as the wave reached the laboratory. "Execute Protocol Omega. They have grandfather's tech. Dimensional tiers unstable. Fine, Maya." The wave consumed her an instant later. She felt no pain, just a strange sensation of reality unfolding around her like origami in reverse. Her last thought was of her sister Maya, and the terrible burden of knowledge that would now pass to her. In the Antarctic facility, deep beneath layers of ice and secrecy, a quantum receiver pinged. A computer system that had laid dormant for decades whirred to life. Across the globe, hidden sensors began monitoring dimensional fluctuations that no civilian equipment could detect. And in a highly classified bunker beneath the Pentagon, Admiral James Rodriguez watched the destruction of Shanghai with grim resignation. He'd hoped this day would never come, but the old guard had prepared for it nonetheless. He lifted a secure phone and dialed a number that hadn't been used since the height of the Cold War. "This is Admiral Rodriguez. Authorization code, Broken Arrow 009. Activate the Thanatos Protocol, and find Dr. Maya Chen." Her grandfather's worst fears just came true. As night fell over what remained of Shanghai, the Mariax ships hung in the sky like a swarm of metallic insects, their dimensional drives pulsing with stolen human technology. They believed they had demonstrated their absolute superiority. They thought their show of force would ensure humanity's quick submission. They didn't realize they had just started a war they couldn't win, against a species that had already created, and then hidden away, weapons that could tear reality itself apart. The price of Earth's vengeance was about to become very clear indeed. Admiral James Rodriguez stood before the emergency assembly of Earth's remaining military leadership, his weathered face illuminated by the harsh bunker lighting. Behind him, satellite footage showed Mariac ships systematically stripping Mars of its resources, constructing what appeared to be a permanent invasion fleet. For 70 years, he began, we've maintained the greatest deception in human history. He gestured to the ancient filing cabinets lining the walls. The Cold War, the nuclear arms race, the space race, all of it was a cover story. The real weapons were something else entirely. The room erupted in confused murmurs. The Chinese general whose forces had just lost Shanghai rose, his face contorted with grief and rage. What weapons? What could possibly stand against forces that can erase a city from existence? Rodriguez pressed a button, and the room's central holographic display activated, showing footage from 1962. The grainy video showed a test site in the Nevada desert. Scientists gathered around a strange device, its core pulsing with an otherworldly light. As the device activated, reality itself seemed to tear open, creating a void that consumed everything in its path. Project Thanatos began in 1962. Rodriguez continued. A team of quantum physicists, led by Dr. William Chen, discovered something they never intended to find, a way to create controlled tears in the fabric of space-time itself. The implications were terrifying. He switched to another video, this one showing a test gone wrong. The tear grew beyond control, consuming the entire facility before the emergency containment protocols activated. We learned we could create these rifts, but controlling them was another matter entirely. Dr. Chen's team realized we'd stumbled upon something that could potentially destroy not just our enemies, but reality itself. The Russian representative leaned forward. Why are we only learning of this now? Because the decision was made to bury it, to hide the research so deeply that not even those in power could be tempted to use it. The nuclear arsenal was our cover. Let the world think that was the worst we could do. Rodriguez's voice grew heavy. But contingencies were put in place. If humanity ever faced an extinction-level threat, if we ever encountered forces that could manipulate dimensions. He pulled out a tablet, showing real-time scans of the Mariac ships. Their technology is based on principles we discovered and abandoned decades ago. But while they've refined it for transportation and weapons, they've never pushed it to its full potential. They don't understand what they're playing with. The assembled leaders watched in stunned silence as Rodriguez activated a secure terminal. Across the globe, hidden facilities began powering up. Beneath the Antarctic ice, beneath the Sahara Desert, beneath the Pacific Ocean, places carefully chosen and constructed to contain forces that defy comprehension. We're activating everything, Rodriguez announced. Dr. Maya Chen, the granddaughter of Project Thanatos' lead scientist, is being brought in as we speak. She's our best hope of understanding her grandfather's research fully. And if we fail? Someone asked from the back of the room. Rodriguez's expression darkened. Then we take them with us. The dimensional rifts we can create, they don't just destroy matter. They consume space-time itself. If humanity falls, we can ensure there won't be a galaxy left for them to rule. As if to punctuate his words, alarms blared throughout the bunker. New satellite footage showed Mariac ships beginning systematic attacks on military installations worldwide. They were methodically destroying humanity's visible defenses, unaware that the real weapons had never been in those bases to begin with. We have 72 hours before our conventional forces are overwhelmed, Rodriguez said. That's how long we have to prepare our response. And when we do respond, he looked each leader in the eye. The galaxy will never forget the price of Earth's vengeance. In orbit, the Mariac ships continued their assault, their commanders confident in their superiority. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, ancient weapons began to awaken, their power building like a gathering storm. The price of humanity's vengeance would indeed be terrible. but the cost of underestimating humanity would be higher still. Dr. Maya Chen's hands flew across the holographic interface, her grandfather's encrypted research files streaming past in an endless cascade of quantum equations and dimensional physics. The Antarctic facility hummed around her, its fusion reactors powering up for the first time in decades. "Talk to me, Doctor." Admiral Rodriguez's voice crackled through the quantum-encrypted communication link. "What are we dealing with?" Maya enlarged a particular section of equations, her breath catching as she realized their implications. "It's worse than we thought," she said. "The Mariacs. They're using an incomplete version of the technology. They don't understand the underlying principles, just enough to create controlled tiers for propulsion and weapons." She pulled up her sister Sarah's final transmission from Shanghai, overlaying it with her grandfather's original research. "The dimensional rifts they're creating are unstable. Each one leaves a scar in space-time that doesn't fully heal. If they keep using the technology this way." She trailed off, running new simulations. "How long?" Rodriguez asked. "At their current rate of deployment, maybe a year before the damage becomes irreversible. 2 at most." Maya's fingers danced across the interface, bringing up new models. "But that's not the worst part. The weapons we built, the ones my grandfather helped create, they're orders of magnitude more powerful." Warning klaxons blared through the facility. On her secondary screens, Maya watched as another major city fell to the Mariacs' assault. They were being methodical, destroying military installations and infrastructure with surgical precision. "We're running out of time," Rodriguez said. "Do you understand enough of the technology to activate our weapons systems?" Maya stared at the equations, at the warnings her grandfather had hidden in his work. "Yes," she whispered, "but there's something else you need to know. These weapons, they're not just powerful. They're infectious." She brought up her grandfather's final simulations. "When we create a dimensional rift, it doesn't just tear a hole in space-time. It creates a cascade effect. Each rift generates gravitational waves that can trigger the formation of new rifts. If we're not careful, if we create too many at once, what happens? They merge, grow, consume everything in their path, and we can't close them once they reach that point." Maya's voice shook. "This is why my grandfather buried the research. One mistake, one miscalculation, and we could start a chain reaction that devours the galaxy." The facility shuddered as distant explosions rocked the ice above. The Mariacs had found them. Maya's screen showed enemy ships descending through the atmosphere, their weapons charging. "We're out of options, Doctor," Rodriguez said. "Can you get the weapons online?" Maya looked at the final page of her grandfather's notes, at the handwritten warning he'd left for whoever found his work. "The power to tear reality apart comes with a price. Use it only when the cost of not using it becomes too high to bear." She initiated the startup sequence. Throughout the facility, ancient machinery roared to life. "Yes," she said, "but we'll need to be precise. Careful. One rift at a time, perfectly controlled. And we'll need to find a way to close them afterward, or we'll win the war but destroy everything in the process." Rodriguez finished. Maya nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Exactly. The price of Earth's vengeance might be the galaxy itself, unless we can find a way to control what we're about to unleash." Above the facility, the Mariac ships began their attack run, unaware that beneath the ice, humanity was about to remind the galaxy why some weapons were too terrible to ever be used, until there was nothing left to lose. High Admiral Virex stood on the command deck of his flagship, his iridescent scales darkening with rage as he watched the impossible unfold. Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, was disappearing before his eyes, not exploding, not shattering, but being consumed by what his science officer had called a localized collapse of space-time itself. "Impossible," he hissed, his translator converting the sound to crisp imperial standard. "No species at their level of development could possibly." "My admiral." His sensor officer's scales had turned pale gray with fear. We're detecting similar dimensional distortions forming near every major Mariax colony world. They're small, barely detectable, but the signatures are identical to what just consumed that moon. Virex finished. His inner eyelids clicked rapidly, a sign of deep distress in his species. How did they hide this capability from our preliminary scans? The answer came not from his crew, but from the communications array. A human face appeared on the main view screen. An older male with stern features and a uniform bearing unfamiliar insignia. "This is Admiral James Rodriguez of Earth's Combined Defense Force," the human said, his voice carrying an authority that made Virex's scales ripple. "What you just witnessed was a demonstration of 0.1% of our dimensional warfare capability. Every Mariax colony world now has a similar weapon primed in its vicinity." Virex's claws dug into the command podium. "You're bluffing. The energy requirements alone." "We solved the energy problem in 1962, Rodriguez interrupted. "We solved most of the problems your scientists are still struggling with. The technology you're using for your ships, it's a pale imitation of what we developed and chose to abandon decades ago." The sensor officer's console erupted in new warnings. The small rifts near the colony worlds were growing, their energy signatures becoming more intense. "You have 6 hours to begin a full withdrawal from Earth space," Rodriguez continued. 6 hours to save your empire from learning exactly why we buried this technology in the first place. After that, the human's expression hardened. After that, we stopped being merciful. The transmission cut off. Virex turned to his science officer, who was frantically analyzing data from the Ganymede event. "Tell me we can counter this," he demanded. "My admiral." The science officer's scales had turned almost white. "The readings, they suggest the humans aren't just creating tears in space-time. They're creating wounds that don't heal. Each rift leaves behind a signature that could potentially trigger more rifts. If they opened enough of them at once, they could trigger a cascade reaction." Virex finished, remembering ancient texts that spoke of vast regions of dead space where stars and planets had simply ceased to exist. "Get me the high command. Now." But before his communications officer could comply, new alarms blared. The small rift that had consumed Ganymede was growing, its edges becoming unstable. In the distance, Jupiter's other moons began to show signs of dimensional stress. "They're not just threatening us," Virex realized, watching as his empire's greatest invasion fleet began to look insignificant against the forces being unleashed. "They're warning the galaxy itself. The price of their vengeance." His scales darkened to the deep blue of revelation. The price could be existence itself. Throughout the fleet, sensors recorded the growing rifts. Officers watched in horror as space itself seemed to unravel around the edges of the tiers, and in every ship on every scanner, the evidence became undeniable. Humanity had mastered forces that the Mariax had only begun to comprehend. The price of underestimating Earth was about to become very, very clear. Dakar moved silently through the forbidden archives of the Mariax Central Library, his slave collar deactivated by a hack he'd spent years perfecting. Around him, ancient data crystals hummed with forbidden knowledge, their contents deemed too dangerous for any but the highest-ranking Mariax to access. But Dakar wasn't looking for military secrets or technological wonders. He was searching for something older, records of the dead zones, those vast regions of empty space where stars and planets had simply ceased to exist millennia ago. His six-fingered hands flew across the archive's interface, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. As the Empire's leading xenorchaeologist, though they would never grant him that title officially, he had spent decades studying the patterns of galactic civilization, and what the humans had just demonstrated at Jupiter matched something he'd seen before. "Found you," he whispered, pulling up records that hadn't been accessed in centuries. The crystal's holographic display showed a civilization that had existed long before the Mariax rose to power, the precursors, as most call them. "The Void Makers," Dakar read, his heart's racing. Masters of dimensional manipulation, they created weapons that cooled. He stopped, his blood running cold as he saw the familiar equations. The same principles the Mariacs had stolen from Earth, but taken to their logical, terrible conclusion. A noise made him freeze. Footsteps approached, the archive guards making their rounds. Dakar quickly copied the most critical files to a quantum crystal and slipped it into his hidden pocket. He needed to get this information to both his people and to Earth before it was too late. The records were clear. The precursors hadn't been destroyed by an enemy. They'd destroyed themselves, unleashing forces they couldn't control. The dead zones weren't natural phenomena. They were the scars left behind by their final war. In the Antarctic facility, Maya Chen stared at her latest calculations with growing horror. The rifts they'd opened near Jupiter, and the Mariacs' colonies weren't stabilizing as predicted. They were growing, feeding off each other's gravitational waves in ways her grandfather's equations hadn't accounted for. The technology the Mariacs stole, she explained to Admiral Rodriguez over their secure link. It's interfering with our original designs. The interaction between their unstable rifts and ours. It's creating a feedback loop. If we don't find a way to close these tiers soon. How long? Rodriguez asked. Days, maybe hours, Maya replied. Each rift is generating gravitational waves that could trigger the formation of new rifts, even without our direct intervention. If too many form at once, if they begin to merge. The facility's sensors suddenly screamed with new warnings. One of the rifts near a Mariacs colony had grown large enough to consume an entire moon. The readings showed something worse. The space where the moon had been didn't just remain empty. It had become a void, a wound in reality that was spreading at an accelerating rate. Throughout the galaxy, other species watched the unfolding situation with growing terror. The Mariacs Confederation's subject races saw an opportunity for liberation, but also a threat that transcended political boundaries. Ancient defenses, left behind by long-dead civilizations, began powering up, recognizing patterns they'd been programmed to watch for. Dakar managed to get his warning out through underground resistance channels. The weapons humanity wields, they're the same ones that created the dead zones. The same ones that destroyed the precursors. If they're not stopped, if the rifts aren't closed, there won't be a galaxy left to save. The message reached Earth just as Maya made her most terrifying discovery yet. The rifts weren't just consuming matter and energy. They were consuming space-time itself, creating areas where the fundamental forces of the universe simply ceased to function. The price of Earth's vengeance was becoming clear, and it was higher than anyone had imagined. Sub-Commander Crox of the Mariacs fleet stood on his command bridge, his scales flushed with the deep crimson of battle rage. Behind him, 100 of the Empire's most powerful warships prepared for what he had dubbed the final solution. Virex had ordered a withdrawal, but Crox and his loyalists had other plans. If the humans can create these rifts, he announced to his assembled fleet, then they can be killed before they open more of them. No species can maintain such weapons while under simultaneous attack from all directions. The assault began without warning. Mariac ships dropped out of dimensional space at every major population center on Earth, their weapons charged to maximum capacity. This time, they weren't aiming for military targets. They were going for extinction. In the Antarctic facility, Maya's warnings klaxons screamed to life. They're everywhere, she reported to Rodriguez. Multiple attack vectors, targeting civilian populations. Our conventional defenses can't stop them all. Rodriguez's response was immediate. Deploy the rift weapons. Full spread. Maya's hands trembled over the controls. Admiral, if we open too many at once. We don't have a choice, Doctor. Do it. She initiated the sequence, knowing she might be signing the galaxy's death warrant. Across Earth's skies, reality began to tear open. The rifts appeared with mathematical precision, each one carefully placed to intercept the Mariac's assault forces. Crox watched in horror as his ships began to vanish, consumed by wounds in spacetime that defied comprehension. Return fire, full dimensional charges. But the Mariax weapons, based on stolen and imperfectly understood technology, only made things worse. Their dimensional charges interacted with Earth's rifts in catastrophic ways, creating chain reactions that threatened to spiral out of control. The rifts are merging faster than predicted, Maya reported, her voice tight with fear. The gravitational waves, they're creating new tiers without our input. The cascade effect is beginning. On her screens, she watched as sections of space began to simply cease existing. The laws of physics broke down around the edges of the rifts, creating zones of pure chaos, where matter and energy behaved in impossible ways. Crox's flagship found itself caught between three expanding rifts. Full power to the dimensional drives, he ordered. We can jump out off. The ship's drive activation provided the energy the rifts needed. They merged in a spectacular display of physics gone wrong, creating a void that began to expand exponentially. The remaining Mariax vessels fled in terror, their sensors recording the impossible. Space itself was being consumed. In the Antarctic facility, Maya made a desperate discovery. The rifts. They're not just growing, they're becoming self-sustaining. Each one is generating enough energy to spawn more tiers, if we don't find a way to close them soon. Rodriguez understood the implications. How long before they reach populated systems? Hours, maybe less. Maya pulled up new data, her face pale. And I found something in my grandfather's notes, a warning about something called void cascade. Once enough rifts merge, once they reach a critical mass. She didn't need to finish. The sensors told the story. The rifts were spreading, growing, consuming everything in their path. Humanity had unleashed its ultimate weapon, but the price of that vengeance threatened to be the universe itself. In orbit, the surviving Mariax ships retreated in panic, broadcasting warnings to their empire. But for some areas of space, it was already too late. The void cascade had begun, and the fundamental fabric of reality was starting to unravel. The price of Earth's vengeance had become a cost that no one could afford to pay. Ducker stood before the hastily assembled Council of Resistance, representatives from a dozen subjugated species gathered in a hidden base deep within the Horsehead Nebula. Behind him, holographic displays showed the spreading void cascade, areas of space simply ceasing to exist as the dimensional rifts continued their inexorable expansion. The precursor records are clear, he announced, holding up the stolen data crystal. This has happened before. The dead zones we've studied for centuries. They're the remnants of the last time these weapons were used. But the records also show something else, a way to close the rifts. On Earth, Maya Chen received Dakar's transmission with desperate hope. She'd been working without sleep for days, watching as the rifts grew beyond anyone's ability to control. The void cascade was accelerating, threatening to consume entire star systems. The precursors found a way to collapse the rifts, she explained to Rodriguez over their quantum link. But the price, it's almost as terrible as letting them spread. What do we need? Rodriguez asked. The rifts can be collapsed, but only from within, Maya said, her voice heavy. Someone has to pilot a ship into the heart of the largest tear, carrying a device that can generate an inverse dimensional wave. The wave will cause a chain reaction, closing all connected rifts. But, she paused, whoever does it won't be coming back. Across the galaxy, the Mariax Confederation was falling apart. As news of the void cascade spread, subject species rose up against their oppressors. But this wasn't just a political revolution. It was a desperate race for survival. Scientists from 100 worlds shared their knowledge, working together to understand and counter the threat that humanity's weapons had unleashed. In the Horsehead Nebula base, Dakar worked with a team of engineers from 6 different species, building the device that the precursor records described. The calculations must be perfect, he insisted, his hands flying over the quantum forge. One mistake, and we could accelerate the cascade instead of stopping it. Maya's voice crackled over the quantum link. The rifts are approaching Proxima Centauri. We're running out of time. Docker looked at his creation, a device that merged precursor theories with modern technology, designed to save the galaxy by sacrificing its pilot. Who will fly it? He asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Admiral Rodriguez's voice, calm and determined. I will. Terminal cancer. Doctors gave me 6 months. Might as well make my exit mean something. But before anyone could respond, new alarms blared. The void cascade had accelerated beyond all predictions. The rifts were merging faster, growing larger, consuming space at an exponential rate. The galaxy itself was beginning to warp around the edges of the tiers. Maya stared at her readings in horror. We have minutes, not hours, she announced. The cascade. It's reached critical mass. Dakar transmitted the final calculations to Earth, knowing that the fate of existence itself now hung on what happened next. The revolution in the stars had become something far more fundamental, a revolution against the unraveling of reality itself. The price of Earth's vengeance had grown beyond vengeance, beyond war, beyond any petty political concerns. Now the only question that mattered was whether anyone could pay the price necessary to save what remained of the galaxy. And time was running out. Admiral James Rodriguez sat in the pilot's seat of humanity's last hope, a ship specifically designed to dive into the heart of a dimensional rift. Around him, the fabric of space-time twisted in impossible ways as the void cascade continued its expansion. The device that Dakar and Maya had built hummed behind him, its quantum core pulsing with potential. Course plotted to the primary rift, he reported calmly. Beginning final approach. Maya's voice came through the quantum link, thick with emotion. The calculations are locked in. Once you reach the center of the tear, activate the device. The inverse wave should trigger a chain reaction through all connected rifts. Should. Rodriguez allowed himself a small smile. Doctor, at this point, I'll take those odds. The ship accelerated toward the largest rift, its special shielding barely holding against the forces that were literally unmaking reality around it. Inside, Rodriguez thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Humanity's weapons, the Mariax's arrogance, and the terrible price of vengeance that threatened to consume everything. Dakar's voice joined the channel. Admiral, the void cascade has reached the Orion Arm. We're detecting new rifts forming spontaneously. Whatever you're going to do. Understood. Rodriguez pushed the ship faster. Through his view screen, he watched space itself bend and twist. The laws of physics were breaking down around him, creating patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. 20 seconds to entry point, he reported. Maya, Dakar, it's been an honor. Make sure this means something. Make sure we learn from it. The ship entered the rift. Reality stopped making sense. Rodriguez felt his consciousness stretching, expanding, experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. With his last coherent thought, he activated the device. The explosion wasn't visible in any traditional sense. Instead, reality itself seemed to hiccup. The rifts shuddered, their edges beginning to contract rather than expand. The void cascade reversed direction, tiers in space-time knitting themselves closed in a cascade of dimensional energy. In the Antarctic facility, Maya watched through tears as her readings showed the rifts collapsing one by one. It's working, she whispered. The cascade is reversing. Hours later, representatives from every surviving spacefaring species gathered virtually to assess the damage and plan for the future. The Mariax Confederation had collapsed, replaced by a coalition of equals. The areas of space consumed by the void cascade would remain as eternal reminders of the price of wielding power without wisdom. Dakar, now speaking as the head of a new interspecies scientific council, addressed the gathering. We stand at a turning point. Humanity showed us both the height of our potential and the depth of our folly. Their weapons nearly destroyed everything. but their sacrifice saved us all. Maya took the virtual podium next. The technology that caused this will be sealed away, not in secret this time, but under the guardianship of all species. We'll study it, understand it, but never again will we let the price of vengeance threaten existence itself. The new coalition established its headquarters on Earth, acknowledging humanity's central role in both nearly ending and ultimately saving the galaxy. The Antarctic facility was converted into a research center, dedicated to understanding the universe's fundamental forces, not to create weapons, but to prevent their necessity. Admiral Rodriguez was remembered not just as the man who saved the galaxy, but as the symbol of a greater truth, that the most powerful weapon isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, but the wisdom to know when not to. The price of Earth's vengeance had been nearly infinite. The reward for Earth's wisdom would be eternal. And in the vast depths of space, in areas where the rifts had been, new patterns of stars began to form, testament to the universe's ability to heal, to rebuild, and to begin again.